Hello, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. My name is Alexandra Kuzmanovic, and today we are having this live Q&A on a very, very important subject, and that's how to prevent online violence against children. I am very pleased to be joined by Sabine Rakotoma Lala, who is WHO expert on violence against children. Good afternoon, Sabine. Thank you for your time today. And also, we have a special guest who is joining us from the US, a professor from the University at New Hampshire, David Finkelhor, who is also leading Crimes and Abuse Against Children Center at the university. Good morning to you, David, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you for your invitation to be here.
Thank you. Maybe before we start digesting into this very important topic and what all of us can do to protect the children around the world, Sabine, would you please tell us a bit about your expertise and work at WHO?
Hi, Alex. Thank you very much for organizing this today, and thank you for everyone who's participating. I'm a child psychologist, and over the past 20 years, I've really been working on violence against children, not just online, but offline, actually more offline. And really at WHO, my work focuses on driving action by connecting expert partners, by demonstrating what works in collaboration with partners like David Finkelhor, building the capacity of national healthcare workers to respond to cases of violence against children, and then, of course, fostering global advocacy to make sure that the issue of violence against children continues to be addressed in the world today.
Thank you so much, Sabine. And David, you have a rich experience in the area leading the center that I just mentioned, but can you tell us a bit more about your work specifically on online violence against children?
So I've been involved in researching crime, violence, and abuse against children since the 1970s. And the center that we have looks primarily at the epidemiology of these problems and its impact on children, and also to some extent on the kinds of steps that we can take to prevent it, the kinds of programs that work. In recent years, we've focused increasingly on online violence against children because there seems to be so much interest in it, and there seems to be so much of it that is misunderstood. One of the things that we found that's very important is that much of the online violence against children is connected to offline violence. So it doesn't occur by itself. For example, 3/4 of online bullying episodes are connected to offline bullying episodes. And about 2/3 of online sexual exploitation abuse is actually occurring at the hands of people that children know from their day-to-day lives. So it's very important to understand all these problems in relationship to one another.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you for your time today and also for working with WHO. Sabine, as we published this report recently on what works to prevent online violence against children, can we please start with explaining what online violence is?
Yeah, Alex, that's a really important question to start with. So the What Works to Prevent Online Violence Against Children report was launched last week on the 2nd of December, and as a need to address the growing worldwide concern of keeping children safe online. And the report really focuses on two forms of online violence. So child sexual abuse is one of the categories, which includes grooming and sexual image abuse. And the second category is cyber aggression and harassment, and that includes cyberbullying, cyber stalking, hacking, and identity theft. So those are, I would say, the big buckets, the child sexual abuse and then the cyber aggression or harassment. But I think it's really important to say that it's such a quickly evolving field that today the definitions relating to online violence against children are constantly in flux and under development. As David said, most of the forms of violence online involves face-to-face violence as well. And so even the subcategories within these two buckets keep on evolving and changing.
Thank you so much, Sabine. I just want to remind our viewers who are watching us today that if you're watching us on Twitter, please use the hashtag AskWHO to send us your questions. If you're watching us on other platforms, we are monitoring the comment section. So please submit your questions there, and I will pass them on to Sabine and David. David, can you tell us how big scale of the problem of online violence against children is, and how many children are affected daily?
Well, we're still trying to answer that question, unfortunately. And I can say that somewhere between a quarter and a third of kids are in the countries where studied this, particularly in the United States, North America, and Europe, have had some exposure. But we don't know for sure whether those kinds of rates apply all over the world. And but we are getting more information about it. It's clearly a big problem in the lives of kids.
Thank you so much, David. And we're already receiving some questions from. Oh, sorry, Sabine.
I just wanted to add a small point. I mean, David is definitely the expert in this field and has been following this very closely over the past 30 years. But I think since a couple of years, 2-3 years, there's an interesting project called Disrupting Harm, which is a link between UNICEF, Office of Research, and Interpol and ECPAT International, to really start understanding the prevalence. And so they're doing research in a number of countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Philippines, Vietnam, South Africa, Cambodia. They have 13 countries where they're really trying to assess in more detail the prevalence of the problem. But it will take a couple of more years to get more of these country reports out and to be able to start comparing data across countries on the prevalence of online violence.
Thank you. We're already receiving some questions, but before I go into this, can you please tell us what are the health impacts of online violence and harassment? Sabine, maybe you can start.
So the health impacts are manifold. If we look at the direct health impact, the most scary one, I would say, is that unfortunately we see children that end up committing suicide, dying because of these situations that they've been witnessing, and whether this is online or offline violence, we continue to say that it's directly linked to them. Then we have the more indirect causes, so anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, depressions, again, the suicide comes up. And that then those leads to, at further along the line, along the life course, to the indirect impact, which are non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular diseases, health issues, lung issues, and so on. So we see the direct impact and then the more indirect impact over the life course.
Thank you so much, Sabine. Here's a question from Brian Tisman, which I think we really need to clarify, saying that children being exposed to violence on the internet is a direct result of poor parenting. Can we please address this comment?
Well, first, I do want to make the point that online violence against children is quite diverse, and different aspects have different sources. And that there's been a lot of stereotyping about these exposures, for example, thinking that they come mostly from strangers and predators online. But there's a wide range of abuses, some of which happen at the hands of family members and parents, some of which would happen at the hands of acquaintances, and some of which happen at the hands of people that children meet online. Certainly, the quality of children's lives, the kinds of parenting that they've received can make a difference, but it's certainly not the case that the majority of it is due to parental ignorance or inattention or maltreatment.
Sabine, do you have anything to add?
The report clearly finds that what's so essential in the online space is providing education to youth and families to increase prevention skills. So treating them empathy, teaching young children empathy and respect and bystander intervention. So standing up when you see a case of bullying or reporting when you see a case of sexual abuse. And as David said, parents are not responsible for the online violence, absolutely not. But what they can do is help children to learn these life skills, which they will hopefully also learn in school. But I think the home setting is an important place to learn these skills. And of course, as parents, it's really important to have open communication with children so that they can constantly come to the parents if there are issues, whether they're happening offline or online.
Thank you so much, Sabine. And I just want to read a comment from Danielle Dion watching us on LinkedIn, who is saying that she's joining from Vancouver, Canada. Happy to be here. And she says that most of my parent clients describe daily conflict around screen time. As a mediator of family conflict, I'm learning when there is conflict about using screens, kids are more at risk. It is helpful to help families learn to solve problems collaboratively. Kids are drawn to nefarious activities when there is conflict in the home. Would you like to maybe comment, or shall we go to the next question?
No, this is a dilemma that a lot of parents and families face, and finding the right tone and nature of conversations between children and parents is quite important. Obviously, children have to have information about the dangers and risks online, so parents need to educate themselves and not necessarily assume that the stereotypes that they have are accurate about where the dangers are. But at the same time, when parents are too controlling and too alarmed about what's going on online, that may interfere with the children feeling comfortable talking to them about what's going on and what they're encountering. So parents need to find ways to talk to children about their experiences without making them feel like all the conversations are going to be negative and limit setting.
Thank you so much, David. Here's a very good question from Gitanyali Carle Pavar, watching us on Facebook. Which age group of children is the most affected by online violence?
That's a very good question. It tends to be teenagers above the age of 12. This is the age period when young people are beginning to conduct more social activities online and engage in somewhat more risky behaviors. We don't see as much of it for children under the age of 12.
Thank you so much, David. Here is the next question from Veronica Douglas. How can patients, I think she wanted to say parents, recognize their child is affected by online violence?
Maybe I'll just jump into this one because, again, very much like offline violence, when a child is showing extreme externalizing behavior, so being very, what we would call naughty, or fighting, picking fights, not participating in activities, or being extremely introvert, so not speaking anymore, not making friends, being extremely quiet, not engaging in activities, those are signs to look out for. And not everybody has a role of mandatory reporting to say these are children that are possibly suffering violence. But I think as school teachers, as health doctors or pediatricians, they should be looking out for signs and having discussions with children when possible.
Thank you so much.
One of the things that we've found is that children are more likely to disclose things that are happening to their friends and peers, and their peers are more likely to know about problems that their friends are having. And so one of the crucial kinds of education we think is important, has been shown to be effective, is to help empower young people so that they can give good advice to their friends and actually seek help on their behalf when they sense that somebody has gotten into some kind of difficulty.
Thank you so much. Here's another very good question on what students can do to prevent violence.
What students can do to prevent violence?
Yes.
Well,
I assume
one
peer
of the
violence.
things that we found in our report is that prevention education in schools is one of the most effective modalities for preventing the various kinds of online violence. And these include programs that go on for several weeks or months that provide various ways for kids to learn about and practice skills that are useful in staying safe. These include skills like problem solving, disengagement from uncomfortable situations, emotional management and regulation, so kids don't act in impulsive ways. The thing is that kids can help each other in these programs by doing role plays and practicing how to handle certain situations, how to get out of a situation where somebody is bullying you, how to get out of a situation where someone is trying to get you to do things online that you don't want to. These are all things that kids can practice among themselves and get better skilled at handling.
And maybe I can just add two things, Alex, is that I think, I mean, I have a 16-year-old and a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I talk about this a lot with them, how they should be helping their peers. And I think sharing good information, making it clear to them, it's not always about stranger danger, it's about people around them. Establishing and reinforcing social norms. So when saying, if there's bullying going on, make sure that you stand up for them. Promoting empathy, so that the offenders and bystanders can understand why this is happening. So there's a lot of, and as David was saying earlier, have young people help others to seek help. And so they play such an important role in each other's life in that adolescent tranche. And so they can really help each other get out of tricky situations.
Thank you so much. Here's a very good question from Veronica Douglas. Can WHO explain the difference between cyberbullying and online violence with children?
So as I mentioned at the very beginning, the online violence is quite a big category, and until today we struggle to come up with exactly the right categories. And within that, cyber aggression, cyber harassment is one of the big categories, which includes cyberbullying, cyber stalking, even hacking and identity theft. And then under the other big category is everything linked to child sexual exploitation and abuse online. And that will include, for example, grooming, sharing child sexual abuse materials, live streaming, non-consensual sexting. So online violence is the big category. Within that, there's the child sexual abuse and the cyber aggression and cyber harassment. And within those, there are many subcategories.
Thank you so much for clarifying that once again. Here's a question from Edwin Macquarie. How can we protect children from online violence? So maybe we can summarize once again all the recommendations from the report on what are the actions to be taken.
I'll leave it to David because he's the able writer.
Well, the report particularly emphasizes educational programs targeted at young people and their parents, because these have the best track record in the literature of it's evaluated programs of this sort. But there are many other things that we can try to do. We can try to get social media platforms and internet companies to do a better job at policing their environments, at publicizing what the rules are, interfering with and responding to reports about misuse and mistreatment that's happening on their sites, do a better job of making sure that particularly young children aren't getting access to sites, and that people who are misusing the site or violating the rules get kicked off and blocked. There are also things that law enforcement can be doing to better enforce law violations. There are also things that we can be doing to help kids online to get access to good information, have many kind of educational modules that they would encounter in the course of their surfing around the web. So there are lots of things that can be done.
And David, do you think that there should be programs included in educational curriculum and in schools to teach children? And from which age do you think that should start?
Our recommendation is that there should be a comprehensive and developmental prevention program that starts early in kindergarten and follows kids all the way through secondary education. And that every year new topics be raised in this curriculum that build on the foundation of previous topics, that all of them are oriented towards skills and to saying safe and understanding new threats that may be encountered in the developmental life course as they go through it. We don't have too many of programs like that, too many curricula like that, in the same way that we do in maths or in social studies, but there really needs to be something of that sort for online safety and social skills.
Thank you so much, David. And also, as you both mentioned, that this whole digital environment is expanding and changing so fast. How do you think those educational programs can be implemented for parents so they are kept up to date with all the new developments and challenges?
It would seem that the best access to parents is through the schools. And schools give programs for kids about safety. They typically send material home for the parents to talk to the children with and to get educated about. It's the most direct and efficient way of reaching parents. There are efforts to do that in other modalities through public advertising, but the school method probably works the best.
Thank you so much. Sabine, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to add, so it's important to see what came out of this report. So we see there's some strategies that are working to to prevent and to address online violence. So changing legislation, law enforcement, public awareness on online violence against children, technology engineered solutions. So there's these different social media platforms working together, and then there's helplines. So they're all being implemented. There's quite a lot of money being thrown at all these interventions that are very innovative and different. For example, there's crawlers that are trying to remove imagery from the dark web. But really, the safe bet, the only programs that have a very solid evaluations behind them, which is what David has been explaining and has been discovering over the past years, are these prevention education programs. So while all the rest is really interesting, these interventions, and they are collecting evidence, the prevention education programs through schools and involving parents are the ones that are a really safe bet for donors, for governments, for schools. And so that's really what we are pushing for and will be pushing for over the next few years.
Thank you so much, Sabine. And here's a very good question from Edwin McCory. How can we help those children who are already affected? So what are the interventions and the care that children who have already experienced online violence should be having?
One of the things that we know is how children are reacted to and supported by their parents and family makes a very big difference. So making sure that parents don't just get angry and vent at kids when they get into difficulty, that's very important. For kids who are having serious symptoms and psychological effects from violence online and offline, we do have some very good evidence-based mental health treatments. There are programs like trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and other similar programs, some of them in groups, some of them individually with families, that can really help kids be resilient to those kinds of experiences and recover from them.
And Alex, maybe just to add to David, I think, again, it's important to look at the different types of support. So there's the health sector that will play a role in identifying and providing first-line support. If there's, for example, pregnancy following, this wouldn't be specific to online violence, but since we know that online violence links to offline violence. So there's the health sector response, and then there's the psychological side, there's the social side, and then there's the justice side. And so there's different tracks that need to be put in place to support children that have suffered violence, in addition to a supporting and loving family.
Thank you so much, Sabine. And here is a question as well from Adel Al-Souti. How can we get children to talk about that or experiencing online violence and make them feel comfortable?
Maybe I can just jump in on this one, and here I'm speaking more as a parent than as an expert. I think talking about sexuality and about violence and about intimacy from very early years opens a door for when things get difficult. And so having a good relationship with children where you teach them how to solve conflicts, where you teach them empathy, where you teach them respect, you teach them communication in the younger years, that should pay off in the older years.
Thank you so much, Sabine. You answered also a question from Stefan Embry Winkler, who were just asking about how can parents foster conversation and relationship with children. Here is a question from Dr. Robert Ferris, watching us on LinkedIn. Is there a correlation with gender identity and adolescent violence and bullying?
Unfortunately, kids who have alternative identities and sexual orientations are at increased risk. One of the reasons is that they tend to feel isolated and alone, and they're looking for people who can help them understand and share what's going on with them. And maybe they're feeling less able to talk with parents and other friends about things that they're feeling and doing. And it's that kind of isolation and that makes them more vulnerable to violence of all sorts.
Broader scale, and how can governments and what do governments need to do to prevent online violence against children?
So today, maybe I'll speak on behalf of WHO, and then David, you can add. But given the findings of this report, and as I mentioned, we know that a lot is being invested in law enforcement and public awareness campaigns on messaging for youth about the online space or tech engineered solutions. But we at WHO will really be promoting with ministries of education and ministries of health, because we hope that schools have health systems in place within the schools. We'll really be promoting prevention education programs to teach young people about the risks and protection skills that they need to develop. So we really hope that's a best buy for governments.
And governments of various sorts can help advance the education field by funding the development of programs, but then also help schools and decision makers in schools, like teachers and principals, to easily find the kinds of programs that are the best suited for their needs in their school.
Thank you so much to both of you. And I also thank to all our viewers who are watching us from Tunisia, South Africa, Nepal, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, DRC, Yemen, Nigeria, Canada, UAE, Indonesia, Kenya, and many, many other countries that I didn't manage to write down as people were texting. But maybe before we close, you can tell us as well, what will be the next steps, Sabine, for WHO in this area of work? And David, maybe what are the next steps in research, or what are the additional needs on research to help us be better preventing this terrible issue, or also to be better responding to it?
Thank you, Alex. They're such good questions, both from the audience and from yourself. What WHO will be doing is early in the new year convening partners that range from governments to UN agencies to INGOs and academics to identify how we can collectively scale up some of these prevention programs. In addition, an area that we're keen to explore is the messaging directly to young people, because it seems that we're getting the messaging wrong. We're telling them, it's about stranger danger, don't go on the dark web. Whereas I think we need to be much more careful in working with them to understand how they use social media and what are some of the messages that will work to make them aware of the risks that happen online and offline. And so hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll be working with some communications companies and behavioral insight companies to understand how we can educate young people as best as possible, and who should be the messengers and what should be the methods to reach them so that they stay safe online.
And many people who listen in on a program of this sort may be professionals in various parts of the world. And one of the things that they can do is make sure that people in their professional group, whether we're talking about teachers or social workers, or psychologists or law enforcement officers, that they make sure that other people in their profession have information about violence against children, about online violence against children, and have taken some classes or workshops on these topics.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you, Sabine, for all the work on this and really great questions that we received today. We really welcome your work, and we will continue this conversation as it is very important, and digital environment is entering all spheres of our lives since earlier ages now than it used to be. So thank you once again, and I wish you a good afternoon and good day ahead as well for our viewers. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest.